Hi everybody, this is Alex, a solution architect from Rollout. A quick presentation to Rollout and then a quick demo. Um, so essentially, Rollout is a cross-platform feature management solution, VC-backed, offices both in San Francisco and in Tel Aviv. Some of the customers include Zendesk, AT&T, and Walmart. In terms of the use cases that we've seen customers leverage feature flags for, there's a bunch of those. We've seen that it basically boils down to four main ones, which we've built the platform for. Two around engineering, deployment safety, having a kill switch around the feature, having the ability to gradually deploy a feature, either percentage based or target audience based. Deployment velocity, doing things like moving to trunk-based development where you merge incomplete code to the main branch, doing better CI, things like testing in production. These two are around engineering. And then you could also use the platform to do feature experimentation, essentially measuring the feature impact on business KPIs, and also feature customization, which is a bit of a different use case where you just need to segment the features based on various attributes like licensing or geolocation. Rollout has a strong emphasis on the engineering side, both in terms of the use case themselves, deployment safety and speed, but also how can we serve the engineering's best. Just because at the end, the engineers are the ones that are going to gate features, that are the ones that are going to maintain the feature flags. And so we want to make sure that it's the easiest for them to work with. So I'm going to jump to a demo. And I'm going to demo on a single page web application. This is um, a JavaScript React application. The backend is Node, but I'm going to do the feature flagging only on the client side. Keep in mind that everything you see exists on the backend as well, and also on the mobile. There's minor differences between all of these SDKs, but the general concepts are the same. This is hosted locally. This is an open source project that I'm going to use for the demo. It's kind of a SoundCloud replica. It allows you to listen to music and follow an artist. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to one of these artists. And aside from the music, you could see that on the right side, there's this following tab. I'm going to gate this behind a feature flag and then control the exposure remotely. And so to do that, I'm going to start with the code. I'm actually going to jump to the flags.js file where I'm going to import the rollout library. This is the JavaScript library. And then I'm going to do some setup code. And then you could see that I've defined some flags in the code. I've also defined the following view flag. This is the flag I'm going to use to gate that needed functionality. Rollout also supports dynamic variables, things like timeout URLs, things that are not feature flags per se, but we figured that you guys could use the dashboard to configure and control those as well. You can see there's a Rocks configuration over here, but for the demo, I'm going to focus on the feature flag side. So I'm going to take this flag now, and I've jumped to the user.js file, and this file is the one rendering this screen behind me, and I'm going to gate some code. So I've just added flags, the following view, if this is enabled, run this piece of code, else just do nothing. I'm going to save, and I'm going to jump back to the demo, and I'm going to refresh this page. And we can see that the following tab is gone. And the reason it's gone is because the value by default is false. And of course, that's configurable. But in this example, the value is false. Now, one of the things that we've done is that, again, in the notion of streamlining how engineers work with feature flags, we've added a UI layer to all the client-side SDKs that allows engineers to play with feature flags without going to any external dashboard. So I'm going to click on this icon over here. I've connected that view layer to this icon. And this is called Rocks Overrides. And I could actually override all the feature flags that are in the code. And again, this is just available for local development and is used by engineers while they're developing the features, or QA team while they want to check something. And the idea is, again, to streamline how teams are working with feature flags. I'm going to jump to the dashboard now. And so this is Rollout's dashboard. On the left side, you have the main navigation menu. At the top is the name of the application. And if you click on this, you could actually create more applications or services. They're completely separated from each other. I'm just going to play with the Sound Redux application. Below that, we have environments. I've created 3 environments: production, staging, and development, but you could create as many and give them your own names. Below that, there's a flags overview screen, which is kind of the single source of truth. It shows you all the flags which are in the code and how they're configured. I'll show you this in a bit. And then below that, there's a target group screen, which I'm going to show you this in a second as well, but the general idea is to create reusable segments of users so that I could use those segments across deployments. On the right side, you're seeing the active feature deployments. We call them experiments. And there's some high-level information on each of those, and I'll show you this in a second. But for now, I want to complete the example we started with. I've added a flag to the code called following view, and I want to control that flag via the dashboard. So to control that flag, I need to connect that flag to an experiment. Experiment is that unit that allows me to control that flag, which is in the code. So I'm going to click on the create experiment, and then I'm going to select the flag name. Now, with rollout, again, things start with the code. So once you've added stuff to the code and compiled the software or ran the software, depending on the language, these flags are going to be automatically available for you in the dashboard. And the idea was to prevent situation where you have discrepancies between the code and the dashboard. So I'm going to select the following view, and I'm going to set the audience. And following view experiment was created. Everybody's getting the false value. Just to add some clarity to this, production, experiments. I've created a new experiment. It was just created a second ago. I click on this, I'm in the audience tab, everybody's getting the false value. If I go to the setting tab, I can look at and see that the following view experiment is connected to the following view flag. By the way, the default is just a namespace that you can either remove or change. Okay, so now I get to decide how to deploy the feature. So I could deploy it, I could give it a true value, everybody's going to get the true value, everybody is going to get the false value, or I could do a split, maybe 10% deployment. I can also do a scheduled release, meaning I deploy this at a specific time, but I'm going to do something that we've seen is common around kind of use cases that customers are using the platform for. I'm going to keep this at false, and then I'm going to add a new condition, and I can deploy by application version, usually again more relevant to mobile teams, but this is a single page web application. I'm going to keep this with all versions. And then instead of selecting all users, I want to select an attribute, a property, a parameter that would allow me to create a criteria to deploy by. So I'm going to select property, and I've already exposed some properties of my application, of the Sound Redux application, to the system. So I'm going to select maybe an email, and this is a string typed attribute, so I'm going to use something that would help me compare strings equals one-off, and I'm going to give it a value. So let's say if the user email is okay, so essentially what I've done now, and I haven't completed, okay, so I've essentially said, okay, if the user has an email that is equal one of this list over here, he's going to get the true value, otherwise they're going to get the false value. And this is built as an if and else statement. Now, you could also add more condition and create more complicated deployment rules. I'm just going to show you another capability of the system. So instead of selecting property or all users, I'm going to select target group. Again, target group, reusable groups of users that I could use across experiments. I have a few groups that I've already created. So I'm going to select maybe internal employees and beta users and the QA team. So I want to deploy to these groups, and I want to deploy to any of these groups. So if you're in either one of these groups, you are going to get the true value. You know what? You're going to get a split. I'm going to deploy by a percentage, maybe 10%. Now, to understand how I expose these attributes and these groups are created, I'm going to jump for a second to the code. And I'm going to jump to authenticated action. This is just relevant for this application. And you can see that the SDK Rocks has some methods that allows us to expose attributes, either strings, numbers, booleans. And once you've done that, once you've exposed these attributes to the system, they're automatically going to be available for you in the dashboard, so you can segment by those. So going back to the dashboard, I want to show you how I've created these groups of users, these target groups. So to do so, I'm going to go to target groups. And if we look at DJ, this is a group I've created. You can see that I'm using the playlist count attribute, which is a number with a relevant operator and just a value. And so if a user has a playlist count which is equal or larger than 100, it's going to be in this target group. And this is very flexible. You could create new groups and based base these new groups of users by any attribute property that you know of and can access. Now, this is probably a good time to show you guys an architecture slide. So, um, yeah, so this is kind of a high-level architecture slide that pretty much helps understand how Rollout works. On the bottom left, you have the dashboard. We've just seen the dashboard. You go to the dashboard, you create a configuration. We process that configuration and we generate a JSON configuration file, and we actually sign that JSON file with a public and private key. And we save that JSON file to a cloud storage service. We're using Amazon S3 specifically. And then the client-side SDK is either a web application, a mobile application, or a backend service. They download that JSON file. And all the processing, all the decision points happens on the end device itself. The entire architecture is pretty much stateless, meaning there's no active connection between the SDK, the backend, the end device where the SDK is running to our servers. And there's many reasons for this, but there's two main reasons. One is privacy and security. We wanted to make sure that you guys don't have to share your user information with us. And so all we know is the experiment name, the target group name, the feature flag names, but we don't know the user information. The other thing is that we wanted to make sure that if something goes bad for us, there's no impact to your services. So even if we have an outage and our servers are down, at maximum is that you guys won't be able to make a configuration change, but your service is not going to be impacted because at the end the SDKs are reading a JSON file. Now there's also other mechanisms in place to make sure that even if there's no network, your services are not impacted. Our feature flags always have values as default values, and of course there's local caching on the device and other mechanisms to make sure that there's no impact to your services even if we have a problem. The last thing is, which is important around this slide, is that we are using server sent event protocol to notify the SDKs that they need to download a JSON file whenever you guys are making a change in the dashboard. And the idea is around this is to make sure that the speed at which changes propagate to the end devices happens very, very fast. So every time you make a change to the dashboard, we push a notification to the SDKs to let them know that they need to download the latest configuration file. Now there's other events at which SDKs would fetch configuration file. Each platform has its own type of events. On the backend side, this happens periodically. On the front end of the web, it happens on a new session. And on the mobile side, there's various ways for the or various events at which the SDK would fetch a new configuration file. So going back to the example, I'm just going to show you a few more of the capabilities. So I have this deployment over here. I'm going to just make it a bit simpler, and let's give them the true value. And now I'm going to add a new condition. And in this new condition, instead of selecting property or target group, I'm going to select flag. And I could select a flag from within the system to create dependencies between flags. So I have a flag called a color variant, which is actually a string-based flag, which has more than true and false values. So I could say, if the color is green, then turn this feature to true as well. And the idea is that if you guys want to create dependency between two features, that's also easily done. You always have the kill switch. So if you need to turn this experiment off for everybody, easily done. And then if you look at the flags overview screen, again, the single source of truth. These are all flags that are in the code. When you add flags to the code, they're automatically going to appear here. They're going to see the platform, and you're going to see where are they configured, if at all. Over here, the row comments on the Android platform is not configured at all. And if I search for our flag, following view, we could see that following view on the browser is configured across all environments. It's currently turned off in production, and this was just this change just recently happened. And if I click on this, I get moved directly to that environment and to that specific experiment. Okay, so a few last things I'll talk about. One of them is this overview screen. uh, the idea is to help you guys manage feature flags. So there's this column over here called impressions. Basically, we're measuring every time the flag is being evaluated. Each time the flag is being evaluated, it's an impression. And we show you both the impression count, but also the distribution across the values, either true, false, or string based, which has a bunch of values. And the idea is these are operational analytics. The idea is to help the team understand what's going on with feature deployments. There's also a nice tab interface at the upper section. So if I look at 0% deployments, I could look at all these experiments that have a lot of impressions, but then everybody's getting the false value or getting the true value. And I could also look at no traffic, and these are all experiments that are not getting any impressions. And so either it's not deployed yet, or this piece of code is not running for some reason. The last thing I'll talk about is we've seen that some companies have their own ways, or I should say it differently, all companies have their own ways of how they want to manage the production environment. And, there's a process all the way from code changes to configuration changes. And feature flag essentially circumvent all of these processes because essentially you could go to an external dashboard, flip a switch, and then production has changed. And so we wanted to make sure that if companies want to adhere to the same concepts and the same processes they use today, they could do the same with feature flags. So we've adopted the concept of configuration as code or infrastructure as code, and essentially we're saving all of these configurations as YAML configuration files in a Git repository. And I'm going to show you an example with Git and GitHub. And so I'm going to simplify this experiment before that, just so the YAML file is readable for first-time viewers. Let's have these groups and let's do a split for them. And again, let's do 10%. Update the audience tab, activate the experiment. So I'm deploying to either one of these groups with a 10% deployment. Everybody else is getting the false value. And and I'm gonna go now to GitHub. I've connected Rollout with GitHub with a specific GitHub repository. So I've created a new repository called Sound Redux, and then I gave Rollout access to this repository, and Rollout created two folders basically: experiments and target groups. And there's a nice kind of README file that auto-generates with all the examples of how to do things. Now, if you look at the experiments folder itself, you can see that each experiment has a YAML file, and the following view also has a YAML file, which was just updated. So when I'm making a configuration change in the dashboard, the YAML file in the Git repo is updated. If I click on this, I get to see the YAML file representation of this experiment. This is an experiment type. This is the name of the experiment. That's the name of the flag and our deployment rules. And the nice thing is that the connection is bidirectional. So if I actually edit this, and again, you could always edit this locally in Git and then push to GitHub. But I'm going to just show you this in GitHub. If I edit this, and let's do, 65 deployment and some message. And so I've just updated GitHub. And the nice thing is that I'm going to go now to the dashboard, and this was 10 and 90. If I go over here and over here, we're going to see the 65 change. And so what essentially happens now is that I got the same accountability, traceability, governance that I get with code for feature flags. And you could use all the Git operation tools that you know. You could actually look at the history. You could roll back experiments. You could maybe something I haven't shown you in this example. In this example, each environment in the dashboard, production, staging, development, is mapped to a branch. And so production is the master branch, and then staging and development in the corresponding environments. And so you could easily migrate experiments between environments. You could easily compare environments in terms of the experiments for each one of those. So, and this we've seen that this is also very handy in CI/CD pipeline where you want to automate things as well. So the last thing I'll talk about is that each application has a permission tab, and you could add more users to each application and can control the read and write access for each of these users per environment. We're in the process of extending this to the experiment level, but for now it's on the environment level. So I think this is the end of the demo. Thank you guys for joining.